There we go. All right. Thanks, folks, for joining us November 3rd, 2023 for the enablement session, the session one. Today is going to be Scott Henson with Get in an Offline Environment. Take it away, Scott.
Yep. Thanks, Glenn. I'm dropping this in the chat here. That's the link to the project in the delivery kit if you want to look at it. But essentially, we've run into it quite a few times where we need to get GitLab installed in an offline environment, and they want to use our standard tools so they can stay within the reference architecture. The issue they run into is with dependencies. Get pretty much requires that you have an internet connection so it can download everything as necessary. Um, and working with customers that are in um, an offline environment where they can't, their servers that are going to be actually running GitLab can't reach the internet. We've got to come up with a path to get them those packages as necessary. And we could tell them everything they need and tell them to go download and what have you. But things get a little complicated there. So instead, I put together a little script just that downloads everything and packages it up, and in this instance is pushing it to S3. And that's a bucket that would be accessible inside of their environment. Again, this can be zipped and moved and pushed to S3 or however they want to go about doing it. It's just the customer that I did this for, they have a Bastion host that can reach the internet, that has access to the S3 buckets. So this is why we went that route. Um, and then once you actually have the packages, I have an Ansible playbook that pulls those packages down to your local machine into a specific directory under kind of the Git hierarchy. And then there is another chunk of Ansible that's a common script that gets injected into one of the directories that's prescribed by Git that would pull those playbooks, and it um, essentially allows it to run in the get Ansible playbook to install all the dependencies prior to it trying to install GitLab and anything else. So it puts us in a position where we can inject all the requirements prior to um, the actual GitLab Environment Toolkit trying to install GitLab. One of the issues I did run into is that's a common section. It's a common.yaml that is part of Git in their current environment that actually runs after the GitLab install. So there is some changes that need to happen in Git to do that. I opened up an issue and a merge request. Actually, I just got an update on it. They're targeting it to release with 16.7, so it should be next month that you have the ability to inject those files prior to the GitLab install without having to modify their Ansible. But we'll go through everything that needs to happen there. I already ran all the Terraform stuff. And actually, this environment is live right now. It's in a pseudo offline environment in AWS. It's behind um, I created a whole private zone and everything else in AWS to mimic an offline environment to do all the testing for this for the customer. And that's still up and running. That instance is running, and I've been testing runners and stuff against it. So I don't want to overwrite that right now. Um, but let's get to the fun stuff here. I'm not going to read this documentation to you. You can go through it and read it. It's pretty straightforward. If it's not, put in a merge request, please. Um, the big piece is kind of the file structure of where things need to be, and that's after you get all of your dependencies. So, like I said, there's a script to do this to download everything and push it to S3, and then we're actually going to use the GitLab Environment Toolkit's image because it already has all the Ansible dependencies and everything else installed. So I'm not going to rewrite all that or tell you what dependencies you need to install because we're leveraging this in the Git environment anyway. And we'll run this playbook and get all these files into the directory they need to be for the GitLab Environment Toolkit to pick them up and install them. And then down here, there is a section that tells you what needs to be modified inside of the GitLab Environment Toolkit. This run custom tasks here just needs to be moved, and we'll look at that, and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so that being said, I have a jump box here. Let's see if this disconnected. It didn't. All right. So let me just exit and get back to where I am. So when you log into your instance, this is running on Amazon Linux 2. The script is written for anything that is rel-ish. So any kind of Red Hat adjacent will work. I don't have any Debian right now. That's kind of the next steps.
Hey, Scott, are you going to share it?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I was sharing. I'm losing my mind. I appreciate that, Brian. I want to
You
share this.
got more and more enthusiastic explaining things I couldn't see.
I did. So yeah, let me go back here then. So this is a documentation, right? Like I said, I'm not gonna read it to you, but we're going to do these scripts, right? And then we're gonna run this Ansible playbook to put things where they need to be. Here's the configuration changes that need to happen inside of Get. Here's where the pieces look like here, and we'll get to all of this and do it live here. So let's go ahead and get into it. So I have an instance here. This is the jump box. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff running here. As you can see, I've got a whole 3K HA infrastructure running with Docker runner and everything else, or Docker, GitLab's Docker machine runner, all that kind of fun stuff. But we're only worried about this jump box here. I've already got it up and running here, and I'm in the root directory. Essentially, I just logged into this. This is following the normal GitLab Environment Toolkit, right? So I'm running this. This is going to be the Ansible section of it. In my environment is called, oh, I'm in the wrong section. Sorry. Mine's under custom, because I had to make some changes and I didn't want to confuse myself. Ansible environments. DAG LS is my environment. So if you look at this, don't worry about the Docker machine stuff. The real piece we're looking at here right now for the package piece is just packages. So let's go to packages. And in here, I have a directory called offline. And this is for the offline install. Yeah, might want to do a CD there. All right, so there's 4 things here, right? There's the get packages, the requirements.txt, that's for Python, upload packages sh, and our vars.yaml, that's for the get packages.yaml. That's again an Ansible piece. So let's look at the upload packages script real quick. Everything up top is all variables being passed in. We'll look at that in help in a second. But essentially, we're installing the GitLab package repository, installing yum utils if it doesn't exist, making the directory that you pass it if it doesn't exist, which it doesn't right now, and I'll show you that. Using yum downloader to get all of the dependencies for the GitLab RPM file or GitLab RPM package. It's going to separate out, kind of looking right here. It's going to separate out the GitLab binary from the RPM packages. And it's doing that because during the install process of all of these dependencies, it's essentially going to pull down all these dependencies as a list from S3 and then install them, right? And so we don't want the GitLab package to be in there, otherwise it's going to install it. And I don't want to write this stuff to say install everything except for anything that looks like GitLab, right? There's just no need for it. Plus, I don't know what version of GitLab is going to be installed with that package, and I don't want somebody to have to pass all these variables. So instead, I'm downloading it as GitLab.rpm, right? So I know whatever it is has that name, and it allows me to then script easier for that, right? Because it's standardized. But it's going to separate that out into its own directory. And that's to prep for being pushed to S3. It's going to download all the Python packages. And then here's where we're uploading everything to S3. I know I could do this all in one command, but there's no reason for it. I broke it apart just so we're tracking exactly what's happening to us. And then there's an option down here to clean up if you want to remove the files from your local machine that have already been pushed to S3. It's a true or false. If it's true, it's going to clean it up. If it's anything else, it's just not going to do anything. Any questions so far? All right. So the requirements.txt, essentially, this is pulled directly out of the GitLab Environment Toolkit. They have a requirements file, but it's in Ansible, and I didn't feel like parsing it. That's kind of the next step in iteration is just pull the dependencies that Get says it needs. I just created this file, and in the documentation for the customer, I said just verify these prior to. The GitLab Environment Toolkit also tells you to do the same thing as you're walking through it. It's like you need these dependencies, so get these dependencies. So this is where you would update that if these change. As of now, they're current. I'm working on GitLab 15.11.13, just so we're all aware. But if I try to run upload packages here, it's going to yell at me and say you're missing a bunch of stuff here. There's a few options. The directory is required. I need to know where to store this stuff. The version of GitLab is not required. If you don't pass a version, it's going to automatically download latest. So that's just kind of the default. We need the name of the bucket you want to upload to, and then a prefix in that bucket if you want it. So you may have a bucket that is whatever the name is, and then say, I want to store all this stuff under my, GitLab 15.11.13 - Amazon Linux, right? That's the one that's the bucket. So all your dependencies and stuff are associated to that. You can add a prefix to that, so you kind of have a path within your bucket to store things if you're doing multiple installs. Then again, the clean flag if you want to clean up from the local machine. So we're going to pass the same thing, and I'm in the offline environment, and I am going to say I want this to go to this current directory into a file or directory called packages, and I want my GitLab version to be GitLab-EE 15.11.13. That's just the one that I'm happen to be working with. My bucket is actually this bucket here, DAG-ls offline dependencies. You can see there's currently nothing inside of this bucket. So I'm just going to steal this. It's a lot easier than trying to type it. And then I don't have any prefix there. I don't want it to load anywhere. It can go right to the root of that bucket. I don't really care. And then I'm going to go ahead and tell it to clean this up, right? I'm not going to, so we can see it. I can clean it after the fact. So we'll go ahead and run this, and it's going to run through the whole process of finding everything as necessary and getting all the packages and downloading them locally and then pushing them up to S3. And we can see this run. It's going to take a few minutes, especially because the GitLab package is rather large. And it really just depends on what connectivity this instance decides to have at this point in time. I've seen it go super fast, and I've seen it go pretty dang slow. So we'll see what happens here. Any questions while this runs?
No questions so far.
I have one question. You mentioned that like there will be the change to get for the tasks. Did I understand it right? That because get has the custom tasks, but there is no option to run a task before the common role starts. Is that the change that is coming now to
Correct.
get with your changes? Okay.
Yeah, so the common task right now runs after the install, and I'll show you that within the GitLab Environment Toolkit. And so, okay, everything has been pulled and uploaded. So if I refresh here, you'll see it. So right now that common task runs after the GitLab install. Essentially, it's designed to say you need to install all the stuff on your own ahead of time, right? And then what common tasks need to be run after we install GitLab. And so I created an issue for them and said, well, this is kind of, yeah, that common task there is fantastic if you need to put in monitoring or what have you. But what about prepping the environment prior to anything else? And they were like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. So I gave them everything that I put into place, and they've prioritized it. It's been a couple months now, but it looks like they're gonna be putting it in their next release. So we should be good there. So this is what got uploaded, right? Pretty straightforward. You've got your GitLab package in GitLab. You got all your Python stuff in Python to include that requirements.txt file, because we're going to use that in the Ansible script. And then also here's all your RPM packages and dependencies associated with it. Okay, so from there we have all of that piece. If I look here again, there's now a directory called packages, right? So if I look at packages, this is where all these were downloaded to, right? They're pulled down here and then pushed to S3. So if I had to put clean to true, then these wouldn't be here, right? It would get rid of everything. So let me get out of this. So now that they're in S3, the next piece is now say I'm on my machine that's inside of my VPC in an offline environment that has access to the S3 buckets, right? I'm not going to switch machines because there's just no reason for it. But where this would be is in this packages directory is where it's looking for it's going to look for the packages, I should say. So what you would do is, let me go back to offline and show you here. This get packages, this get packages essentially is going to download everything to your local host. So that, again, this would be something that's already in your offline environment, right from that host. It's going to reach up to S3. It's going to make sure these directories exist within your get environment, right? So wherever you have your get tool you're going to be installing from, it's going to list all the Python packages in the bucket. It's going to download those Python packages from the bucket, and then it's going to install those packages. Like I said, the requirements.txt file is going to get used during the install, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then this is going to list packages in the bucket for RPM, and it's going to download them, and it's also going to download the GitLab RPM from the bucket and go to, like I said, that GitLab.rpm generic name, so we can use that in the future. And then the vars file for it is extremely straightforward. Essentially, it's what's your bucket name, what's the prefix for Python, what's the prefix for RPM, what's the prefix, or what's the path to your GitLab package, right? And like I said, you can go get that information. We could make this a lot cleaner, but I figured for how often it's used, it doesn't need to be super clean. So essentially you can just copy and paste this or what have you, whatever you want to do. You can also look at the name in your packages directory if you really want to. In this environment prefix, I just left in here. It's not, we're going to use this when we run the Ansible playbook here. So if we're on our machine here, in our offline environment that needs to download these packages, we're going to use the GitLab Environment Toolkit's container image, and I've run this about 1 million times, so I'm not going to. Oh, that's not what I want. I'm a dummy. How about grep? Yeah. There we go. As you can see, I've run this a few times. So I could just execute this, but I'm gonna copy and paste. So essentially what we're doing is doing a Docker run. I'm adding this directory for Ansible. That's because that's where there's a bunch of dependencies and everything else. The GitLab Environment Toolkit is telling you mount this directory. So I'm going to go ahead and mount it. And then this keys directory isn't really necessary, but I have found if you don't also mount this volume, right? What's going to happen is there's a script that runs that's going to fail, and then weird things happen, and I just didn't feel like digging into it, so I'm like, I'll just leave it there, take advantage of it. But you can see this is a container image that's there. I didn't want to parse through everything they were doing, so I was like, I'll just go with their advice. So once we're in here, we want to go to our actual Ansible playbook here. It's going to be under Ansible environment, and then whatever your environment name is. So if I look here, my stuff's under packages. And offline, right? So there we go. That's the get packages.yaml. So I'm going to run the Ansible playbook against that. Right. But I want to pass the flag here for my environment prefix, because that's how it's going to know what variable files to pull, because I don't have an inventory or anything of that nature. So, and I didn't want to hard code them in there for people having to edit the playbook and everything else. So I have a vars file, and I just want to pass the environment prefix so it knows what it's doing there. And that's going to equal mine's dag ls, right? And let's go with that. And this is going to take a minute. It's creating the directories that don't exist. You can see it's marked as changed because they didn't exist. It's listing things out. It's going to download these packages. If this is already run, right, it's going to check and show that it's already downloaded, and it's going to okay. But this takes a little bit of time. And you're wondering, Scott, why didn't you just zip this thing up? Well, if you zip it up, it actually doesn't save very much space because these packages are already condensed. And then you run the risk of having a rather large package to download at one time. And if your bandwidth is low, or there's some weird settings that you have between your environment and the AWS environment, I've run into issues where we get failures of downloading a larger package. Generally, that shouldn't happen, but I've seen it happen. So I am like, you know what? I'll just separate these things out. Not to mention, it looks really pretty to see all the crap that's being downloaded. So if something fails, or you're like, do I even have that package? You can just look and see the output of it, or what have you. Or if you've added something to it, you'll be able to see, oh, okay, nothing else has changed except for that one package. But we're gonna let this run. So this is the Python piece. Then it'll do all the RPM stuff in the GitLab piece as well. Again, this could be like super clean and pretty, but it was kind of down and dirty. Here it is. This functions, run with it. If anybody feels like refining it, you are more than welcome. Go for it. while this is running, any questions up to this point? All right, then while this is running, let's go ahead and look at the GitLab Environment Toolkit here, and I'll show you where these things need to be changed. It's going to be under roles and common and tasks and main, I believe. Yeah. So down here towards the bottom, unless they've changed it, you know what? I can just go look at my documentation here. It's Ansible roles, common tasks, main. Yep, run common task is what I'm looking for. I'll just find it. There we go. It's at the very bottom. I don't know how my brain missed that. So run common tasks here. Essentially, everything else has already been installed, right? So this, all these up here are installing GitLab from the RPM package, right? Everything is already happening here, and we don't want that to happen to us. So this task essentially needs to get moved up. And if you look at the documentation, I tell you right here, this needs to be moved above the task named install GitLab package via repo if configured. So we're going to move up here, and right here is the task we're looking at. So we want to inject this right here. And I'll show you. I mean, I've already done it within my system, and I can show you that. Okay, this is downloading the RPM packages right now. And again, this is downloading to the local host. The reason I didn't have each machine go out to S3 and download the package is then every one of those machines has to have the ability to do that, right? So now you have the instance has to have access to S3, and it may not need the access to S3. And again, that was one of the customer requirements. Is like all of our instances aren't able to reach S3. They don't have that in their IAM role, and we're not going to pass them credentials to do it. So again, downloading everything here locally from a machine that does have that access, and then just pushing those files over from this machine to those. Okay, so this is done. Let me go ahead and exit out of this container image here. Let me go up a level and show you where this is. So now under the packages directory, I have my offline directory, but I have these other ones too that just got created, right? So if I look in GitLab, there's a GitLab RPM, just like we said. If I look in Python, it's going to have everything to include this requirements.txt file. And then if I look in RPM, it's going to be the same thing, all the RPM packages as necessary. All right, so let's go back and look at what is Get native. So these two directories here, files and inventory, are native directories for Get. So within the inventory, this is all the standard stuff. You've got your YAML file that's got your inventory. It's a dynamic inventory, and then you have all your variables that need to be set. But really, we are looking at files, and there's a bunch of stuff you can inject in here. The big piece that we're looking at is the GitLab tasks, because these are tasks that you can pass. So common.yaml is what we're looking at, and essentially you can write any YAML file that is usable by Ansible, right? To pass, and it'll get injected. So let's take a look at this file. It's really straightforward, right? Essentially what I'm saying is copy all the packages and put them in temp GitLab Python. This is going to be putting those in there on the target resource, right? So your Rails nodes or your Giddily nodes or your Prefect nodes or Sidekick nodes or what have you, right? That's where it's going to put all these files as a placeholder. So it's going to copy everything there, and then it's going to install them based on the requirements.txt file. So instead of going through and saying, list out all the packages that are there, then install them one by one, instead, I'm saying just install the stuff that's in my requirements.txt file. That's what was downloaded, right? So they should match fairly straightforward. And then the RPM packages, it's the same exact thing. Copy it to the temp, the temp directory dependencies, just so I should rename that RPM just to make it a little more streamlined. And then essentially anything with .rpm go ahead and install it, or get the list of it, I should say, and it's going to install based off that list. And then this is going to install these RPM packages, or this is going to create the list, I'm sorry, and this installs it, that list based on those RPM packages. If we left the GitLab RPM in there, it would try to install that as well, and then it just throws all sorts of issues. So that's why we ripped that out. Any questions so far on that?
Maybe one thing. So you removed from the actual common task the part which does the installation itself. Is that right?
Does the installation of GitLab?
The installation of RPM files, like when it tries to fetch from internet and install.
Okay, yeah,
stuff.
so I'll get to that here in just a second. That's a good question.
Okay.
And so that's in the task file here, right? I'm going to go back here and kind of show you what's happening. So it's going to get injected in here prior to installing anything. But if you look at the documentation here for for the toolkit here, we're going to look at the networking setup here and look for offline setup guidance, right? So the offline setup guidance, this needs to be in place, right? Offline setup equal to false, needs to be in your variables file for Ansible. And that's going to tell the GitLab Environment Toolkit, don't try to download anything, right? And it skips a bunch of stuff. So if you go and you look and you want to dig through the Ansible that is the Ansible scripts that are happening, let me go back here. Right. See, only when not offline setup, right? There's a bunch of things that are associated to that not offline setup, so it doesn't install those pieces. But where am I at here? So let's look in their directory here. Here's where I had to change things, right? So we're going to go to roles, and then we're going to go to common, and then we're going to go to tasks, and then the main.yaml here, right? So let's do a vim of the main.yaml. All right, so this is performing all the common tasks as intended. Let it be, let it do its thing. It's pulling GPG keys if it needs to. But again, this is going to be only when right here. Oh, my mouse is fun. Not offline setup, right? So it's not going to do any of this stuff anyway. This is mounting the stuff as intended, creates the directories as necessary, and then it gets to run custom tasks, right? This was down below, and I moved this to run in front of this install GitLab. So this custom task essentially says, grab the custom task file and do whatever it says to do, right? Nothing really super fancy here. And so because I have that in place, when I go to run, okay, so environment. So when I go to run my Ansible script, it's going to run that on its own. So even if I do, let's go back up to Docker. I know it's here still. No, did I move around that much? No, there we go. So to run this normally for the GitLab Environment Toolkit, you go to your environment here, and this is going to have your playbook and your inventory, and you would run this with Ansible playbook -I inventory, right? And this is going to pull your dynamic inventory from AWS. And we can look into that if anybody has any interest. And then I want to run the is it under? Oh, I'm losing my mind. Sorry about that. I've run this too many times doing other things. You need to go to Ansible here, and you're going to run Ansible -I, and this is going to be your environment, right? So it's going to be environments, my environment, and inventory. And then this is going to be playbooks, all, because that's all the playbooks are going to run. And then if you need to pass any flags, you shouldn't have to pass any flags. But I'm going to go ahead and run this, and it's going to try to reconfigure my environment, but I don't really care at this point. Just kidding, it didn't like that. Oh, because I did Ansible, not playbook. Thanks, Aaron, for not yelling at me while I was doing it. You saw it happening. I saw it in your face. Okay, there we go. So Ansible playbook, right? And I'm passing in the environment for the dynamic environment. It's finding all the nodes or what have you, and it's running all these playbooks. I've kind of messed with a few things in the meantime, so we'll see if this this pukes on me. But this takes a while to set up, so I'm not going to sit here and watch this happen. But what I will do is there's another piece. Let me stop there. Are there any questions as of now, or is anybody completely lost? No. Okay. So I'm going to reconnect here while that's running and show you something else I worked on. I've not pushed this up, but if you have any interest in it, we can definitely do that and take a look at it. Again, this is all under my custom stuff. This is in Terraform. So again, another custom requirement from the customer, right? They didn't have the ability to create security groups and IAM roles and policies. They weren't allowed to do that through Terraform. That had to be done out of band. So they need to be able to pass in those security groups and those IAM roles. Get doesn't do that. It'll add in additional security groups, but it won't get rid of the ability to not create security groups. And so in my environments.tf, just stick with me here. It's super long. But essentially what I did was I added in the ability to pass a default IAM role or custom IAM roles. So, and then a default security group. So essentially it says any instance, put this IAM role on it. Any requirement for security group ID, this is the security group ID we're going to use, right? If you want to add it, that's the default to every resource, right? Generally not acceptable, but that is for their testing. They're like, we're just going to have one just to get up and running, but we'll isolate these things in the future. I'm like, okay, fine. So in that also, this create IAM roles, you can set to false or true, and those flags are there. So if it does create IAM roles, it's not going to attach this IAM role, right? If you tell it to create security groups, it will still attach these security groups, right? So you're going to create security groups and then attach the security groups on top of that. If you leave these out, right, it's get as normal, does nothing. Here's options for specific security groups. And I just annotated them here just so it's kind of easier to find. But if you create security groups specific to the services, then you can inject them here and add them as necessary, which allows you to not have a default across the board. So you can say this security group only needs to be able to require, is only required to talk from, this service to this service, or this this security group to this security group, or what have you, right? Whatever rules you want to put in place. Everything else here is pretty straightforward, right? This is all stuff that comes out of Get. Why Vim underlines things, I don't know. This is the internal load balancer if you want to use it instead of HA proxy. Everything else is the same, but I injected those there. If you really want to look into like all the changes I make, it's like 90 something, I think, changes within the code, maybe more. I don't know. I took a while to go through it, but those are all injected there. And it's the same thing with IAM roles. You can add IAM roles based on needs. You can say my Rails node needs this, my Sidekick nodes need this, whatever, right? And you can break those apart. Let's see where this is at. All right, this is still running. Any questions now?
I have one related to the IAM profile. So I had a very similar case that like customer Deutsche Telekom in this case needed a different IAM profile for the instances. I did make some hack to overwrite in the Terraform module to the profile.
Mhm.
My question would be like, how do you maintain it? Like, did you make a different repo then, like a different fork, and say customer, okay, like each time you need to now check and pull from upstream, or like what was your approach if you need to modify something in Get?
So I essentially I took the GitLab Environment Toolkit, made all my changes, and then I pushed it to a separate repository, right? Because they're in a disconnected environment. So I had to essentially then I pushed it up in GitLab in a private project under my own namespace, right? And then I made that project public for about 2
Mhm.
seconds, just so I could clone it from their environment, because they have workspaces that can reach the internet. So I pulled it down there, and then I made it private again on the GitLab.com side, and then pushed it to their environment. I told them that these changes are out of band of Get. I've talked with the Get team about it and said these are requirements, and then essentially they said that's stupid. If you can't create security roles and IAM roles, like what are we even doing? And so I was like, well, I don't know. For government customers, it's pretty standard, but I made those changes, and I don't know. No, I did. I created a branch with those changes, and passed it over to their team and said, take a look and do whatever you want with it. But if, like I said, I've not pushed that stuff up. So if you want to take a look at it or dig through it, we can absolutely do that.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, so I had to go through and add in a bunch of optional pieces, right? And that's not necessarily the fun part of doing this. So let's look at these modules. Again, this is all AWS specific, right? So we'll do the one that everybody knows, which is Rails. So you can see here, right, for the security groups and stuff, I had to put in a bunch of things, but this is IAM profile name, right? So if default, IAM profile is null, and again, I had to add all these variables into the variable files, and there's a lot of work that had to go into it. But essentially is, if it's null, right, and that's where the question mark comes in. So if this ends up being true, then do this, right? Say IAM profile name, or then it's doing another check, and it says, are you giving me a GitLab Rails IAM profile, right? And if that's null, right, then this ends up being null, or use this name. So if all of that doesn't work, right, then it goes back to the var default IAM profile name, which is going to be nothing. So it's going to pass nothing to that, but that's fine. And I'll show you why that is in the future here. And then also with the security group IDs, I had to add a flatten in here because they weren't doing that. They were passing in individual IDs, and then essentially add a try because they weren't there either. And then flatten whatever is in Rails security group IDs, flatten whatever is in default, and then this is a custom. This is actually from them, but then whatever's in your custom security groups for Rails as well. And that's kind of how those got injected there. But this is calling AWS instance, right? That's the module it's using. These are all just variables. So let's go look at that real quick. Let me check on this and see where it's at. Still running. Okay. So this is going to be in modules, and then this is going to be GitLab AWS instance. Right, and anything that's an instance is going to use this module. Oh, how about a CD, Scott? Anything that's creating an instance is going to use this module, just like we saw, and it's just going to pass all the variables to this. So if you look here, this has a main.tf, and my dash original is their original one, and then the one I made changes to. I didn't really have to mess with data disks, I don't think. I did have to put all the variables in as necessary though, but that's all minutia. But in the main here, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? So the resources AWS instance, and then it's looking for an IAM profile, right? And so what this is saying is if the length of instance profile is greater than 0, which that is what was sent over from the ARN, right? That is being used when the policies or what have you, right, are getting created down below. I'll show you all that. That's all within Git. That's not any change I made, right? But so if they're adding new policies and the IAM profile name is null, aka we didn't pass anything from my changes to this, then it's going to use AWS IAM instance profile, which gets created inside of this Terraform module, right? And it's going to pull the name of that, right? So if it's saying nothing was given to me, then use what we created for you. Otherwise, use what's in the profile name. So if there is no IAM instance profile that's supposed to be on this instance, this is going to be null by default, which means this is not going to get passed. So it's not going to add an instance profile to that instance. But then if you scroll down here, you'll see there's a whole bunch of other fun stuff where it's creating those other resources and whatever. Here's the instance profile here. Here's the role, aka if this is created, it gets passed up above. And I just bypassed all that stuff essentially with being able to have conditionals in there. Any questions on that? And that's for the security groups, IAM roles, all of it. Like I had to do essentially the same thing, rinse and repeat about 500 times. Aaron, as you know, if you had to change the IAM role piece, you know, like it's in like 60 places. But
Yeah.
yeah, and you think you have them all, and then you run Terraform apply and something pukes, and you're like, why? That shouldn't have anything to do with anything. But it does. All right, so this is
Yeah, I also passed the private IP to HA proxy instance for the customer case. So as you say, like you need to add variable and ladder of variables until your variable is actually used in the in the module itself.
And then also speaking of HA proxy, right? They didn't want to stand up an HA proxy instance. They wanted to use load balancers to essentially front their Rails nodes for their ingress. And so that's not in the GitLab Environment Toolkit. It has an internal load balancer to navigate between Rails and all your nodes, you know, within the GitLab ecosystem. But to get what we'll call external, even if it's offline, right? The customer into GitLab via URL, they wanted to use AWS native load balancing, not HA proxy. So there's a few concerns that need to happen there to make those work. One of those is a setting in Ansible, because you have to, I'll have to show you that in a second, but you have to tell it what that internal load balancer is for your Rails node. Otherwise, it tries to go outside of it. It's a huge thing. It took me like 2 days to hunt down what the problem was and why things weren't communicating, but I finally figured out. I can show you that here in a second. But again, we'll play while this is running. I created this external load balancer piece here just for them to be able to run this load balancer to create a network load balancer and an application load balancer. So they wanted an SSH port of 2222, so that's what I passed to it, whatever. Subnets associated, security groups ID, you know, IDs associated, Rails instance IDs. Again, I could pull this from the Terraform state and say, give me the you know, Rails instance IDs. But then we're essentially connecting two disparate things together that if something breaks down the road, they're like, holy crap, how's it getting this information? So I didn't do that. I just hard coded it here. This is for the cert to terminate SSL. If you want to use one, if not, it will create one for you and upload it. Again, this is going to the cert manager within AWS. The customer actually just came back like 2 days ago and said, we can't use cert manager certs. We have to use IAM certs. So I need to make an adjustment here to have a flag that says, do you want to use an IAM cert or a ACM cert? So that's pretty minor. And then these are SSH items. that aren't really necessary anymore. They're kind of a legacy piece that I just haven't cleaned up yet. And then if I look in these modules here, actually, let me go here. Right, main.tf, where do you want to store your Terraform state? What region are you in? That kind of fun stuff. And then let's look at the meat of this. There's only one module here because I am too lazy to break it apart. And so if you look at this, it's got an application load balancer, network load balancer, variables, certificates, whatever is necessary. So if I look at my main here, essentially same thing, just my requirements. Okay, let me check on this while we're waiting. All right, this is done. Let me finish my we got a few minutes left, so let me finish this real quick. If you look, essentially the network load balancer is the first thing that it's looking at. This creates a network load balancer, target attachments, all that kind of fun stuff. And it's the same thing for the application load balancer, all the stuff necessary for an application load balancer. And then if you look at the certificates, essentially this is saying if you don't provide the certificate, right, then go ahead and create one, right? That's the count piece here. It'll create it and pass this information up. So it creates a certificate in ACM. And again, Terraform apply. You can go look at the variables here if you want to. These are all the variables associated as necessary. But everything is in your, it's going to be in your environments file. Okay, so this is done, right? This went and pushed everything and installed all the custom tasks, and the instances that I have, like I said, I can show you here. These are all running in their own VPC. That is 100% private. There is no public IP address for anything, and it's all running behind a private CA. So a private CA and a private zone. So this is my dag.com here. And again, this isn't even accessible via the internet. So if I go to gitlab.dag.com, nothing comes up. It's like, hey, what the heck are you talking about? But I have a workstation or workspace from AWS that's in the same VPC that allows it to connect. So I can actually go into that workspace and go to gitlab.com or dag.gitlab.com or gitlab.dag.com even. And get to that instance. It takes a second for it to spin up, so I'm not gonna go through that. Any questions? We got 7 minutes left. Jonathan, I know you got some. You always got questions.
No, I'm thankful for everybody on the call because you know, I didn't realize that there were blind spots to me, but certainly all of the questions that have been asked so far have actually been really helpful to me. So I'm always thankful for the collaboration aspect. Also, I'm happy you got a chance to show off all the problem solving you've been doing. This was a lot deeper than I realized.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward when you walk through it, right? Because it's like, oh, we found the solution. Here's the solution, right? But getting to that is really where the time is spent of running about 1,000 Terraform plans and then Terraform applies to watch it blow up in your face and scratch your head as to why. And the same thing with Ansible, but at least we have a solution that we can use. And I'm going to inject more in that documentation just to clarify a few things, like the requirements.txt file is not talked about in there. So I need to add that into the documentation as well. But thanks, Jonathan. It was a lot of fun work.
As like if I'm absolutely scrounging for questions, are both Cert Manager and obviously IAM certs is an AWS feature / service, but is Cert Manager also a feature?
Yeah.
That
Yeah, Amazon Certificate Manager.
Are you able to talk about why a customer may wish to use one over the other?
Well, if you're talking about GovCloud high side, they can't use a few things. They don't exist. ACM is one of them. Service doesn't exist in high side, so they have to use something else like IAM. And also when you're talking about the difference between IAM certs and like ACM certs, it is really accessibility. So you can have an IAM cert that's available to anything with an IAM role, right? But when you're talking about ACM, it's do they have access to ACM or not? So it's where do you want to define these things? But also ACM is really designed to be a cert manager to create certs on your behalf. And manage them for you and all that stuff, right? IAM certs don't do that. It's purely upload the cert and use it.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's really for the customer we're working with, though, it's constraints of the environment. Actually, they just came back, like I said, and said, hey, application load balancers don't exist in high-side GovCloud. Okay, well, that's a problem. So yeah, so I was like, well, we got two choices. We can do things through the hard way with network load balancers, and then terminate SSL at each Rails instance. But then you get into a problem of when you have to refresh your cert, it's a nightmare. And then the other option is, do classic load balancers exist in high side? Yes, and they're not scheduled for removal for a long time. So I just have to convert that over to that. So I plan on adding that to the load balancer piece anyway, to be able to use classic or a combination of network and application load balancers. I just haven't gotten around to it, but I guess I'm gonna have to get around to it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, good deal. You gotta love end of life.
Yeah, and we got 4 minutes left. And I can't show you my newest fun project, but maybe we'll do that next time. If anybody's interested in Docker machine runners running on AWS, they are a hassle, especially when you have an environment that doesn't have access to public certs, and they're using proxies and all sorts of other craziness. I've just recently finished doing all that, so I have Terraform and Ansible to set up Docker machine where you can inject custom certs and proxy variables and everything else, and it runs it all the way down to the machines that get spun up on the fly from the manager, and allows it to scale as necessary, like Docker machine does, but it has all the requirements injected into it. So that took a while, but it's there. So maybe next time we'll demo that one. Put that on your list, Glenn. We'll talk about it next year.
Right on.
All right, but 3 minutes left. Happy Friday, everybody.
Happy Friday. This was a brilliant session. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad we can put it together. If anybody else has more questions or you think of something, there's another session later today, so feel free to join and bring them up there.
Cool.
All right, thanks for everybody's time. I appreciate it. Y'all have a good one. Enjoy your weekend.
Have a good day, everybody.
Take care, all. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.